Before I begin, let me just remind you, ask you to either turn off your cell phones or put them on silent mode. And also to let you know that there's going to be a reception following the lecture tonight, celebrating the opening of the exhibition of the Erdy McHenry work that's downstairs in the exhibition gallery. So immediately following this, please join me and our guests in the exhibition gallery downstairs. It is my great pleasure to be able to introduce to you Scott Erdy, who is I believe our 14th Seligman lecturer. It is also my pleasure to welcome tonight Gene Seligman, who has come up from Cortland to join us. Thank you for coming all that way, Gene. And I want to thank Jerry Wells and Barbara Wells for driving Gene up. Jerry is a former colleague and I believe an employee of Werner Seligman at one time, maybe, right? It is, the lecture tonight is supported by an endowment that was set up to honor the memory of and the work of Werner Seligman. Many of you perhaps don't know who Werner Seligman was. Maybe most of you don't know who Werner Seligman was. So I thought, before I introduce Scott, that I would take a moment and introduce also Werner Seligman to all of you. Werner Seligman emigrated to the United States following the Second World War, where he survived the concentration camp in Germany. He went on to study architecture at Cornell University and later returned to Germany to do graduate studies at the Technische Hochschule in Braunschweig. Between 1956 and 1958, he taught at the University of Texas at Austin, where he became a member of what later became known as the Texas Rangers, a group of outsiders that included Colin Rowe, Bernard Hoseley, the painter Robert Slutsky, John Haydock, and John Shaw. If you are not familiar with the Texas Rangers, there's a very interesting book written by Alex Carragon that we have in our collection. I would refer you to that. Collectively, they have had the Texas Rangers have had a significant impact on architectural education in this country, the effects of which are still being felt to this day. In fact, some of the exercises that many of you have done in first year were derived from pedagogical experiments that began back in the 50s at Austin. Following his return to the East, Seligman held distinguished teaching appointments at Cornell University and at the Harvard GSD. In practice as Werner Seligman and Associates, his firm received numerous awards and many of the projects received wide publication. Seligman became the dean at Syracuse in 1976. During the 14 years of his tenure as dean here, he presided over what was nothing less than the complete sort of transformation of a school that had up until then had been largely known as a kind of regionally distinguished school of architecture. During the period, Seligman founded the Florence program, the MArch I program, and the visiting critic program, bringing young and relatively unknown architects at the time like Rafael Moneo, Mario Botta, Massimo Carmassi, and Stephen Hull, just to name a few, in fact. He revamped thesis and established the tradition of superjury that continues to this day. By the mid-'80s, the school's reputation had risen to a national and international level. Graduates from that period, like Scott Erdy, have gone on to distinguish themselves as practitioners, teachers, and scholars. A number of former students and faculty colleagues are currently serving as deans in the United States at other institutions. In 1981, Seligman was named a Fellow of the American Academy in Rome, and in 1994, he was the Thomas Jefferson Visiting Professor at the University of Virginia. In addition to serving as visiting critic at numerous institutions in the United States and around the world, Seligman wrote and lectured extensively on the works of Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, and other architects. In 1998, shortly before he died, Seligman was awarded jointly by the ACSA and the AIA the Topaz Medallion for Excellence in Architectural Education. This is the highest award that an educator can receive in the field. In summary, I would like to read you a quote from our own Bruce Coleman that I think expresses eloquently the legacy of Werner Seligman. And I quote, "He was a tireless worker with a legendary passion for architecture and teaching. Those who have had the opportunity to know him, work with him, or study under him are keenly aware of the enormity of his contribution. Those architects who are teaching or practicing around the world know the many ways he has touched their lives." And that is certainly true. 36 years ago, on my way back from grad school, I decided to take the northern route from Boston along the New York State Thruway, and someone told me I should stop at Syracuse and check out a school there that has a new dean by the name of Werner Seligman. I was on my way back to Pittsburgh, where I had a teaching job waiting for me there. But I took the detour. I spent a few hours with Werner, walking through the building, talking to him about his plans for the school, wondering what the hell he was doing here when he could be teaching at Harvard, at Yale, Columbia, and anywhere else. And I asked him that. I said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to take this school and we're going to turn it into one of the best schools of architecture in the United States." And I can't tell you why, but I believed him. And I think the evidence of that prophecy has come to be true. I think it's appropriate, it's fitting that our lecturer tonight was a student of Werner Seligman's and a graduate of the program at the time that Werner was the dean here. Scott Erdy is a principal in the firm Erdy McHenry Architecture in Philadelphia. Scott has more than 20 years of experience in the profession. His work has been recognized by the American Institute of Architects for excellence in design, earning more than 14 local, regional, and national awards. Scott's work has been recognized nationally in architectural publications, gallery exhibits, and by the national media. Scott is active within the profession, serving on the Urban Design Committee of the AIA in Philadelphia, along with work that he does in the community in Philadelphia. Scott has a long association with academia, including teaching at the Philadelphia University School of Architecture. He was a visiting critic here, I think maybe twice already, at Syracuse, and he is currently teaching a graduate design studio at the University of Pennsylvania. Scott received his bachelor's degree in architecture from the Ohio State University in 1986, and then went on to study abroad in Florence as a university fellow. Scott returned to the United States to complete his master's degree in architecture here at Syracuse University. In 1990, with his partner David McHenry, who is with us tonight, Scott founded Erdy McHenry Architecture. Please join me in welcoming Scott Erdy. Does he need this?
No.
You're going to have that. You got a wire on your arm.
Yeah.
Welcome. I'm going to take one of these. You don't
No, go ahead. If I go over like 2.5 hours, just let me know. I'll make sure that. I'm just kidding, by the way. All right. Step one. Yeah, it's not right there. There we go. Good. Get one of my papers. I got one of my papers with you.
Did I grab yours too?
That's all right. It's all right. Thank you. Randall would always do that during a review, come in and change your scheme the night before. So it's not uncommon that he would try to do that again to me. It's a great honor to be here. Some of the folks I see in the audience makes me feel like I should not be here. It's very daunting, some of the folks that are here, and I'm very happy to share with you some of the stuff that we've been doing, my partner David McHenry and I, with Erdy McHenry Architecture. So Causality is the title of the lecture. I had lunch with a friend of mine in Philadelphia who works at Raytheon. You know, and as I leave our office and I look at all the little buildings that we've done, and I go to pick him up and I'm waiting in the lobby of their corporate offices, I notice on the wall of their firm is the space shuttle. So here we are, we spend all this time on small objects, one-offs, prototypes of everything, and these guys are actually building the space shuttle. And for me, the sort of the essence of beauty really is in these forms which are embodying purpose. So the idea that nothing in this shape of this piece of equipment is there for an aesthetic reason. And so for us, we are still students of architecture. Not that we're good at doing it yet, but like you guys, we're just trying to find our way in terms of a path or a trajectory in how we think about buildings and how we see things around us. If you look at objects of purpose, the space shuttle again here, compared to the lizard, and if you know anything about the space shuttle, it's got these amazing tiles on it, on its chin, that help it sort of interact with a certain kind of environment, not unlike the lizard. So if you look at these two objects, they're both pretty cool in my mind, and they're designed without a necessary aesthetic applied to them. So in our work, we try to think about those things. Again, this is an analysis one of my students at Philadelphia University did, but the idea of the shape of the shark itself, everything about it has to do with its purpose related to its form. Even right down to the texture, if you ever had the opportunity to touch a shark, you know, it has this very rough texture that goes one way, which actually helps them swim. And there are other examples of these things and a relative connection between them, which I find very interesting because I look at stuff like this and I think about how we design things to look cool, and these guys design things that are cool. So for us as architects, you try to look toward things of purpose in order to make your craft, because what we found is, in working with, especially in this climate today, economically, it is extremely difficult to have anybody layer anything on except the bare minimum. If you look at a NASCAR, I put up this slide in honor of my father, who was a great mechanic, never went past the 12th grade, started working at Anheuser-Busch. He was the guy sitting there watching the bottles go by when he got out of high school. And when he retired from there, he was the head of maintenance at this entire plant in Columbus. And he loves NASCAR, so I put this up here. But it's up here for the reason of also, these things look cool and they are cool, and everything about that has to do with its purpose, from the aerodynamics of its form, the inlets, the rear spoiler, even the headlights, which are actually a sticker, have the idea of signifying or connecting to a car, which this is a Chevy, looks exactly like a Chevy you'll see in the showroom, right? But the idea that that thing is really a surface or a canvas for advertising. So even the things which are aestheticized have to do with purpose. And when you get to the architect, here's again a race car, very, very nice. You look at what the architect does, right? The architect who, in the shadow, creating a shadow for this, has to apply things which make them think it looks like architecture. So for me and for us, it's all about trying to find those things which are required of the structure and express those as part of the architecture. So how did I get here? By car, a very long drive in a rainy Syracuse afternoon. But before that, I remember I came here because of Werner Seligman. So it's a great honor to have Mrs. Seligman here tonight. I was at Ohio State, and I had a professor, Neil Payton, who told me I should go to talk to them at Syracuse. Werner might be somebody I'd be very interested in. And so I came here, and I drove up the hill. And as I drive up the hill in the ice and the snow, I swear to God I am not coming to this school. After 2 or 3 hours with Randall, and 3 years later, there I am. So I want to thank Mrs. Seligman. I want to thank Randall, who was a great person for my personal development. Stephanie, Julie, and Anda for putting this together, and then Alex Brinkman in our office for putting together the exhibition with Grace, and also David McHenry, who is in the back readying up the fruit to throw at the appropriate moment in the show. So this idea of Corbeau and what Werner talked about in all the classes, all the things he did, I was always amazed by the level of detail that everything object of purpose expressed. So the ABS class, Advanced Building Systems, that I took with Joel Bostic, it amazed me at the Heidi Weber Pavilion how you could talk for 3 hours about the bolt pattern of the pavilion underneath the roof. And that amazed me in the fact that all these things being considered as architectural aesthetics were really in service of a different purpose. The idea of how things worked and how that expressed themselves. So that's really why I got here. So I'm going to go through some projects that we're doing, not that they're necessarily meet the grade of that, but to share with you some of our own process that we've looked at in our office. This is a project that we did for vertical screen. This is an image of the Johnsville Naval Air Development Center where all the Apollo astronauts trained. So in that building, in this building over in here, you see the centrifuge where every Apollo astronaut went through. The idea that this site, which once had an immeasurable greatness to it about engineering and about looking towards the best solutions to problems, is now a senior citizens home here. It's a really bad flex office building park here, and the entire runway is gone. There's basically nothing there that really reflects its history of that place. So what we did for them was to try to recreate this sense of a heroic form and this idea of engineering it to a minimal enclosure for people. So this is basically a call center that exists on this site. It's one large open space. Our client is very dedicated to the environment. So this building actually is LEED Platinum. It's at the time the LEED 2.1 rating system. It was the 9th greenest office building in the world. And it was because of the dedication of this client. For us as architects, what we wanted to do was to recall the heroic form of the hangar that once was there and express it in this building. Because basically what he is a call center. So the idea of housing people in a not so nice way, what we wanted to do was just house them in a different way that instead of disconnecting them from their environment, really connected them with their environment. So the building basically sits in this large open space in the field, and then within that it's an open office configuration. So the idea about systems within this building, a sectional diagram here, you have the open office space, the core, which has the hard wall spaces, the mechanical spaces, which nest over top. It has a geothermal system that works throughout the building, and the idea of how the building is heated and cooled, including the Cylindra panels on the roof, which provide 20% of the required electricity. But it was a great opportunity for us to do a couple of things. One, rethink the office paradigm, how are workers housed, but also to try to reconnect this place to its past. This is a project that we did in Philadelphia. It got a National AI Award. It's featured in National Geographic's Places to Visit and some other stuff. This was for a developer. And I talk again about the idea of constructing buildings with that which is necessary for the building to function. And so for this guy, this is a developer that had worked in the city and done some strip malls, some really bad things that had people up in arms. He already had an architect, and they were already finished. These were the elevations of what he was planning to do, which is basically a housing project that surrounded a piazza. So this is the plan that was submitted and approved in zoning, in the spot zoning things that happened in Philadelphia. And he was very happy with this. The trouble was that the neighbors were not happy with this and were putting up a great deal of resistance to him. And so we were introduced by someone in the design committee for the neighborhood, and he said, you know what, you guys can do whatever you like, but you can't really change anything. You know, I got my bulk zoning, the square footage is all approved, the number of units are approved, and all of that. And what he wanted was a piazza, right? He had been to Piazza Navona, and he loved it. And he thought that the piazza was really the picture, the wedding cake, but not necessarily how it functioned. So what we did was we had to go backtrack a little bit and try to find out what he loved about that, which is the urbanistic idea of overlays of different function, different activity, and different scales. So what we had to do was we had to take apart his plan. So the previous plan that you saw was based on the majority of these 2-bedroom flats, so basically 1,000 square feet. And so what we did was we analyzed that and looked at how much square footage he was using in the building and things like that a developer would be interested in knowing. So basically that 1,000 square foot unit, green unit, red unit, basically created a 10% add-on factor. What we did was reconfigured those units, and back to Werner Seligman again and the education I got here. It's the unite section. So what we did was we did sort of townhouse units around the central quarter. So 216 square feet is now serving 6 of those units. So basically we were able to cut that to the 3% add-on factor. So all this is great for a guy like that, but this is when he set forward and was very interested in talking to us as architects, not because we could do a wedding cake that looked better than the other wedding cake, but we understood about the practical side and the economic side of architecture. And so for you students out there, which a number of you are, as I am, the idea that you have to understand what the client is looking for so you can leverage that into what you're trying to do as an architect investigate. He had no interest in the idea of the section other than the fact that when we looked at the end, this configuration saved 36,000 square feet in that overall project. Basically it had fewer hallways to manage, had better units that had light on both sides, but this is the part that he was very interested in, and how that one move of paying attention in history class could save him $7 million. Or you could actually rent that space and make $800,000 a year extra rent. So he chose this one because he's in it for the long game. But this is when we were able to engage him as his architect in a way that interested him, right? Because this is what he cares about. For us, what we cared about was socially an apartment building could be a very deadly thing where you never see your neighbor. What we wanted to do where in 36 feet there were 2 doors, there are now 6 doors, and what that will do is create a higher level of social interaction. So basically unit A comes in like this, unit B comes like that, something that we're very familiar with. This is the courtyard space that's in the middle, and then this is the idea of this piazza. So what was before in a plan that was basically just a bent bar, we actually cracked this thing open to allow smaller scales of pocket park. So the idea that you can actually come through the building and engage this plaza in several different locations was something that would give it that sense of urban space. In the previous plan, this corner was not addressed with anything, and what we were able to do was take that 36,000 square feet and actually give him a free building. Those social spaces that we created by way of the 2 corridors led into these holes within the building, which added a degree of social interaction through the building. So these are actually shared semi-public spaces up in the building that now take that corridor and have views in and out of the building, as opposed to just the one light at the end of the hallway. So knowing that this guy was not a great fan of architecture and not somebody that could be trusted, what we tried to do was really build it into the DNA of the project. So it's a block and plank structure. And because these are very narrow units that go all the way through the building, we basically had it be window wall and the structure. So I remember getting the call on a Sunday afternoon asking me how we can take some money out of this project because, you know, no matter what it costs, it needs to cost less. So what we were able to tell him is that, you know what, it's nothing but the structure and the infill glass. So he reluctantly did not cut anything from it. So here's the finished product. So you can see the 2 corridors that serve the entire building, the double height spaces here of the units, the single height space, and you can see how they nest themselves together. But the thing that it does for us is it really creates this idea of connection to a place within the city. So you look out to the city or you look at the piazza, it's really about this interconnectivity with the spaces around it. This is his birthday party he had right after it opened. So I guess you can have a lot of friends if you have a really nice open bar and food. Well, there were about 3,000 people in there. And I'm really happy to say that architecturally, this has created a new square in Philadelphia. So you've got the 4 primary squares in Philadelphia. This has really become the 5th square. It's packed almost every weeknight. Thursday nights there's a concert. And have any of you guys heard the DJ Diplo from Philadelphia? Nobody? So So actually, there's a picture of this on the cover of his latest EP. So it shows him rocking out in this space, and it's got our building in the background. So for me, architecturally, that's the sign of connecting with culture, and I'm more proud of that than this thing getting published in Architectural Record, because it really tells its relevancy to a modern society. And here's the facade comparison of the two, where ours is on the bottom, where you see the approach of when he handed his architect a postcard from Piazza Navona, this is what he thought he wanted. And you guys as students of architecture, when you got out of here, you really got to understand that what people tell you they want may not be what they need. So you as a teacher, when you leave here, have to really work hard to educate clients so that you can take somebody who has a lot of money and that kind of vision and turn it into something else. This was what we did with the free building, the 36,000 square feet. So it's a pretty simple structure. It's glass on all sides. It's an office building, 5,000 square foot plates that exist in a place that didn't have any office space before that. So we basically designed this all glass building because we wanted to be able to see everything. We pushed the core to the side. And really, it's a dumb idea to do an all glass building that faces all directions and takes in all that sun. So in order to accomplish that, what we did some analysis in Ecotech and let the expression of the skin be relevant to its purpose. So you'll see in the glass types, as this thing is south-southwest, the glazing types are very different as they are on the north side where they become all clear. So that patina pattern is really based on this sense of, not patina, this moire pattern is really based on its orientation. So one could actually read that object, and there's a legibility about its purpose and its relationship to that aesthetic. This is a project we did for another reputable developer in Philadelphia. This is the Cunningham building, which is a piano factory and headquarters. And this guy bought this building. He bought the air rights adjacent to it. So our charge was to really add on to this building. So he acquired this parcel here. He had another architect, a friend of ours, Brett Weber, doing this, and he wanted us to design the addition to it. So we were able to take his challenge of wanting a 100% net yield and actually push that a little bit further. So we were able to utilize the core components of that and basically make a whole 100% yield building. What's interesting is, in this section, is that each floor had elevator access only at a dimension of 27 feet for 2 floors. So divide that in half. What we did was actually divide that into thirds, and we're able to get like 120% yield out of this building, which was a good thing to do when you're trying to create a budget in a building for architecture. So in this particular project, what we did was utilize the existing core and then pulled this thing into thirds such that you could get additional bedrooms in this space. So you see how this section starts to work. So it's kind of like a split level building. Also, as that part of that project, what we did was we were able to use the new building to brace this old building that didn't comply with the current seismic regulations. So this building is, parasitic in one way, using its core and its services, but it's also parasitic in the opposite way, where this thing actually provides additional bracing for it. So as this thing goes through, oddly enough, this is an historic building in Philadelphia. It's not on the National Register, but it's a contributing resource. So we were quite nervous going to get zoning approval for it. So what we actually were able to make the argument is that by not replicating this building, but really actually providing notches so you understood this building in its sort of solid form, that it actually was more respectful of that building and it got full zoning and historical approval. After which the developer immediately sold the building to Church of Scientology with his new gained value in the FAR that could be accommodated with little cost. And once again, the architect, trying to solve problems for others, gave this great opportunity for a windfall to a client. So again, the idea of architect as developer, not necessarily something I recommend, but the idea of trying to understand how the system works will really help you. This is a church project that we did for a priest friend of mine, Father Scott Schaefer, and it's in Jackson, New Jersey. So it was for St. Aloysius Church. St. Aloysius had a congregation which was basically center aisle, pews on either side. Everybody loved going to Mass because they didn't have to talk to anybody. They could just face forward and not interact at all with each other. And so we started meeting with these people trying to do something a little bit more socially interesting, and we asked them, who was St. Aloysius? They said, well, that's who I write my check to every week. So the idea about a touchstone that they did not have was this understanding of a connection to their patron saint. So we tried to use that for leverage and looked a little bit at his life. So as it turns out, St. Aloysius was this really rich kid, son of a Italian land baron, who basically said, Dad, I want to become a Jesuit. And he's like, are you sure you're next in line to have all this stuff? And he wanted to be a Jesuit. So he went off, helped the poor, ended up dying of the plague. But he had these 4 devotions in his life that he committed himself to. So what we used with that was part of the education of the congregation to these devotions and to show how those become the basic cornerstones of their church. That combined with an Old Testament reference, this idea of pitching the tent, was a way for us to engage the congregation in not only their faith, but in sort of their patron saint. Not to mention the idea of calling, to worship by way of its form. So here you can see the 4 devotions, the choir of angels, the Passion of the Lord, the Blessed Mother, and the Blessed Sacrament. So these are actually the 4 corner chapels that make up this church. And it's some really bad sketches that are done over there. So here's the site. So you're out in the middle of suburban New Jersey, right? So it's actually, quite horrible, like a lot of suburban areas, particularly in New Jersey. And so we are competing with bad 70s housing here, bad 60s school here, bad apartments there. And what we were trying to do was really create an icon. And today it's very difficult to create an icon. You can barely do it with a church. But people are very nervous about creating a building that will actually become referential about their faith. So what we did with this building was to really create something with this idea of pitching the tent and calling a place for God to come to be with his flock. So here's a plan of that. It's an addition to an existing building, but basically those devotions wrap the corners through value engineering, simplifying, reducing all these things down to its bare essence. And it came to the idea of how the hell are we going to build this roof? So we had done a lot of research in our office, and we found this semi-retired engineer who still worked by hand out in Santa Fe. He was, we called and let the phone ring and finally answered. But Dan Tully is the engineer of this, who has a patent on this of this roof form. So it's a hyperbolic paraboloid roof, which is basically made of 3 sheets of plywood glued together. So that entire roof at 45-foot spans is only that. And we found that not only because we were trying to make this reference to the tent, but also because it was cheap. We found out that this is what's used, like Villanova's basketball arena was made by the very same thing because they needed a big space inexpensively. So what we did was we sort of tried to work the architectural technology together with that shape. And this is the resultant form. So what you have here are the chapels which wrap the perimeter, talking about the earthly life of St. Aloysius. The roof talking about pitching the tent, calling a space for worship. And then this actually, in the semi-round, a whole different kind of congregation where you actually see one another when you're sitting in the pews. So here you see some of the chapels around the perimeter, and this idea that worship now goes around the altar. That's the choir loft. This is a project that's close by, and I will have to give kudos to Tim Stenson, who is here tonight, who is on our project team for this. This is the Intermodal Transportation Center. It's part of the Center of Excellence. So this is the Center of Excellence here. This is the site that kind of lurps its way around here. This is the field, the geothermal field that's part of the Center of Excellence. So, and that would be great if I showed you that earlier. So here is actually contaminated soil, all of the wellheads, and it's a very complicated site for basically a parking lot. So within this, what we had to do, working with Tim, is really program what this thing was as part of a federal appropriation in terms of what is an intermodal transportation center. So the idea of it's not only parking for the center, but it's part of the connective corridor that Julie Cerniak is working on, but it's also these other things which create a place or a hub where you can rent a bike, you'll be able to rent a car, you'll be able to charge an electric car. So the idea of thinking about how to get off oil, how to make this thing self-sustaining, how to use the natural environment, and more importantly, Syracuse, as you know, has a combined sewer system like Philadelphia does, which when it rains a really lot, the sewers just back up, and raw sewage goes into the river. This is the process. I put up this slide because this is the process that we've been in with Tim for now 3 or 4 years. We started, I'm sure where we started here, and we somehow were lost in one of these phases right now trying to get approvals for this. But basically what the site is trying to do is act as a parking structure where you could actually park your car outside of the city, at the edge of the city, take a bus into the university, charge a car, rent a bike, but also it's really to treat the stormwater. So what this is a pilot project that not only treats the stormwater for the site, but actually takes the stormwater off the street and gives it a place to go as opposed to going in the sewer system. So these are actually some of Tim's sketches here, but this idea of this evapotranspiration basin that takes that water, allows it for a place to sit, but oddly enough is also a place where you can plow the snow and pile the snow up for the snow mountain, which happens every year here in Syracuse. Basically, the building has a pavilion, there's a pavilion as part of this project, which exists in a structure that's really trying to be a moment of expression of what this thing does. So it's a very modest shelter, but it also has a photovoltaic array on it that's basically like a 2-click clock. So this is the wintertime click, and this is the summertime click. So it basically orients itself a couple of times to give it best orientation. So here you see that top as it's changed over time. You see the vending that happens within the space here, and you see its roof that gives some modest shelter to it. Rendering of it, where you see the stormwater basin in this location here that takes water off the parking lot as well as the street. The idea of the rainwater being, sort of dripped into that basin as an expression, and the idea that this thing actually is self-sustaining, so it will actually put enough electricity into the grid during the day that's what it will use at night for the parking lot. And a heated bench. A little bit further away, but not too far, this is at Cornell. We were asked to compete to design their new teaching dairy barn. So this is the site on Dryden Road, just outside the university, but it's really a gateway location. So the ag campus just wanted a dairy barn. The university architect wanted a piece of architecture, and that's where we were given that task of trying to bring those two things together. So what we looked at was, again, here's Dryden Road, the idea of trying to understand the drainage of the site. Mina, who's the planner at the university, is very conscious of how stormwater management is handled, even in a remote site like this. So the idea of the ridge lines and how the natural drainage swells would not be compromised in our plan, as well as the orientation of the building that would work with this sense of how the wind works. The goal of this project is to be a LEED Silver building, and if anybody knows anything about dairy farmers, is they are already extremely sustainable in the way they work. So to try to cut 20% off the usage of this is actually nearly impossible because the only energy you're using is lighting. It's a naturally ventilated barn. So in that context, we're looking at summer wind locations, winter wind locations, and how that thing can have an effect on what the building looks like. It's part of a master plan that will have a livestock arena, animal research facility. But what you can see in this plan is really the sensitivity, taking their research fields up here and actually slowing that water down as it comes through. So basically, the landscape plan is this stormwater basin that actually engages, in some ways, has a connection to these fields that are up there. You see the dairy barn in this location there. So within that, we've developed a landscape plan with Brian Haynes out of Philadelphia, where this thing actually has native plants that are used that actually change seasonally to highlight that effect that's having in the landscape. So in the fall, for instance. And some of the texture that will be part of that landscape, which will be a natural landscape, which will be modestly groomed in order to have access. So this is the part that really got cool. But for us as a firm, we are not dairy barn experts. We're not experts at anything, as all architects are. You are really interested in learning about stuff. So I must say Dr. Gard at the college was extremely patient with us as architects and going through how a dairy barn works. So I'll tell you how it works if you're interested. If not, I can just keep going. So I'll take that as a yes. So basically the cross ventilation, if you recall, this thing is set up so that it has curtains on the side which are open in the summer and almost half open in the fall and almost all the way closed in the wintertime. So basically that allows natural ventilation. It's a freestall barn, so these cows can actually move around wherever they like to within the barn. So you basically, the components are the silage, the feed, the special needs barn like the mini hospital, the freestall, and then what's called the milking parlor, which is a term I've gotten very fond of. So basically going out to the hospital, this is, if you can see that, this is the route in to be milked. And as an architect, these dairy farmers are really ingenious. So this is not our idea, but the idea that cows hate to stand on a hill sideways. And I didn't know that, but they will never stand sideways on a slope because they'll fall over. So they naturally just move their body like this. So what do? When you're trying to queue up 40 cows, you basically slope it. So they all have to sort of naturally face upwards. And then this little rack right here kind of gently pushes them along. So they go through there, and then they get milked, and then they come out this way and back, and they just have a grand old time. There's a little cow comfort station here. It's like a cow salon that has a brush that they go up against, and as soon as they touch it, it starts running. They can clean their hooves. They can get a drink, and they can talk right before they go back to their stall. So basically 180 lactating cows, a herd of 20 dry cows, and this is the bedded pack where they actually give birth to the calves, and the calves are out in calf hutches outside here. And then this is the interesting part too. This was the most that we talked about, was how the manure gets out of here. So I don't know, has anybody been on a farm before? So at a dairy farm, it's not manure, it's very much a liquid. It's not like manure you maybe have seen before. So basically, this whole thing is sloped 2%. So not our idea, but something that we had to work with. So they basically, the entire barn slopes to this point, and this is where it's all collected, which is a very nice place to avoid, which is actually right here. We put the teaching dairy sign on it. So here you see the building, and again, for us, what's really interesting to us is that this thing, it's not cool because of us. It's only, we think it's cool because we were able to manage the functional requirements and the program and sort of inject purpose into that form. So you see the top form here. This is where the humidity goes out of the barn when it's being ventilated. The side curtains are open right now. This is the milking parlor. It has ventilation pieces along the side as well. So here you can see the cows feeding. There's a feed lane down the middle that the cows all come to be fed. It's a very interesting process. We were also able to incorporate it into a classroom, which actually sits at the high point of this. And from the classroom, there's a window that looks out of the milking parlor, so they can actually teach students, and see it while they're talking about it. And this is the fun stuff about this, is basically these are the side curtains. These are all products that we can now use on other projects now that we know about them. But the idea of being able to raise this curtain mechanically to change the environmental impact or the environmental relationship it has with wind in the site. Again, a detail of that. Here you see, not yet quite developed, but you start to see the rain gardens, which will be working with the landscape on the sides here. And special needs barn is on its way. So again, the idea of trying to knit a purpose, I feel happy for the ag campus because they just wanted a dairy barn. And they get this architect from Philadelphia, and they're like, please God, just give us a dairy barn. We just want to milk these cows, right? And then you've got the university architect saying, please God, we've got a gateway building to our campus. It can't be a red barn with the big X's on it. So the idea of trying to merge those two things was something that we took as a really great challenge, and something that really drove the project. It's very, they have a nice ceramic tile floor along the side there because that way they don't abrase the concrete with their tongues, right? It's more resistant to the cow tongue along the side, something I never thought about before. The fans, a fly cannot land if there's more than 5 miles an hour of wind. So basically there's 5 miles an hour wind all the time. There's where the cow station was right back. I missed the beauty parlor. I got a couple more projects if you bear with me. This is a project that we did for Drexel University. This is Millennium Hall. Again, a client with great ambitions. Dr. Papadakis, the late Dr. Papadakis, wanted to do a world-class building. He wanted it to be a landmark building, and he had all these great aspirations for it. The site basically sits on 3 tennis courts. The charge through competition was to get 500 beds of housing on 3 tennis courts for an extremely low budget. There's a view of it, and we actually met with him on some previous projects, and we told him that if he keeps building dormitories like he has been, he's going to run out of space at the core. In my research studio, we studied student housing, and for instance, Penn has about 200 students, or 119 students per acre. Swarthmore has 7 students per acre. Temple has 180 students per acre. Drexel has 440 students per acre, right, in terms of the student population. So what we told him was, you got to start building up, and you got to start building up soon. So he said that was a great idea, just to go convince the neighborhood, which through David McHenry's help we did. So this was the problem, right? These are other student housing things, and this is the part of architecture that you don't necessarily dream about doing well at in school. But I got to tell you, if you want to do the stuff that you love to do in school, you either have to be very good at this or have a very good partner that can be very good at this sort of thing. So basically, some projects that we have done, the average of those is about $68 a bed. Their budget was $32 million. They wanted 500 beds. That's like $65 a bed, which is it's below the average. And there are some really cheap dormitories in here, the cheapest of which we did at Temple at like ungodly numbers. So the only thing that we could do was really to change one variable, and that was the square footage per student, because he still wanted this landmark building. So we saw it as our charge. So basically what we did was we looked at doing a building which was very tight to the site and went up directly vertically as quick as it could. We oriented the ground floor to be orthogonal to the existing context, and the building actually has a twist to it because downtown is in that direction over there. So as this thing twists around, it actually gets a better view from the top floor where we put the community space for the school at the very top. So I should note that we collaborated with Cecil Baumann on this while he was still the deputy chairman at Arup. He was a co-faculty member of mine at Penn and was very happy to help on this project and added a lot of input in terms of the structure. So basically, how did we do that? We took the basic dormitory type and we fragmented all the pieces. So I apologize, it's a little bit difficult to read. But here you have the elevator core, and then we separated all the bathrooms, the sinks, and the showers such that this floor acts as a suite. So this is one suite as a floor. So it's actually the honors dorm, and it's a very popular dormitory to be in. All the bedrooms are outside of the structural wall, which is here, and the bedrooms all cantilever out from there. So what we did was we had to solve that equation by having less square footage per student and still create enough for architecture. So in terms of cost per square foot, it was like $340 a square foot, but cost per bed was low because of that variable. So what we did was, as this thing goes up, this thing basically offsets the structure 10 inches every floor. Because I paid attention in ABS class, I knew that we couldn't really do that to the elevators and all the plumbing chases. But what we did was we rotated the bedrooms around the top so that when you got to the top, you overlooked this wonderful green roof and saw that view of the city, which you see there. And note the green roof. The university's comment on the green roof is green because it reflects light as opposed to absorbing heat. We had a different idea of what green was, but we were that close on the margin. So what's really interesting, this is a social model, is that it's organized by floors by people who have like-minded interests. So the idea that Drexel has is to really incorporate out of your major things that you like to do. So students are eco-nuts are up here. You have dance students, art studios, people that like a certain music, sports, or science. They have these sort of things that they gravitate to. So that's kind of the view of it. And you can see the cantilevered structure. And with all things in architecture, our hope is that, you know, the coolness is in its DNA, you know, the idea of the structure. So if your building would look good 100 years from now when all the skin fell off of it, I think that's what, you know, this would look probably a little better if the skin fell off it maybe. So here you see it going into construction, the idea of prefabricated panels on it, the lobby, and so forth. And then even small things. So you recall in structures class this idea of the slenderness ratio of a column. We really wanted to open this up. It's typically 10 feet floor to floor. This is a double story. So even these small little kinks in that column give a stiffness to that column, which helps its slenderness as it goes up. I'm going to start going quicker because we're about an hour. We're redesigning Penn's architecture school. If you're an architect, the worst thing you can do is be hired to design the architecture school where you teach. So Penn Design consists of several different buildings. Includes fine arts. It includes fine arts here, the Fisher Library designed by Frank Furness, as well as the undergraduate program here. So the idea of these disparate locations and how Penn's mission could be satisfied with that. So basically, Meyerson Hall, I'm not sure if any critics have been there for reviews at Meyerson Hall, but you basically enter into this corner right here. The college green is over here, and what you see when you enter as a visitor to the school is the garbage. So most everybody goes in that door, so it's right next to the trash in case you have something to throw away. It's quite convenient. So what we looked at was circulation patterns between each of the buildings and looked at the urban edge of the school and how we could start to connect it with green spaces as well as the college green. What's interesting is this building has no front or back, but really, you know, the ceremonial front door is this way. This was Kahn's studio right here where he taught, never went in Meyerson Hall because he was overlooked for that commission. So he was still bitter to the very end, never stepped foot in Meyerson Hall. That's why he always taught in the apps. But the idea of front doors and how that thing is approached. So I apologize, Randall, I flipped the plan orientation mid-presentation. But what you have here is this main entry into the college green. And what we're doing is creating a stairway that comes up. Underneath on the ground floor, we're moving the fabrication lab so it has outdoor studio space, a studio wet lab here, and then studios on the ground floor, creating the stairway that comes up to a commons, which now we're going to blow a hole in that. So as you come up the ceremonial stair, you actually are framing the apps that Furness designed, but also the studio where Kahn taught. And then studios going up, a modest addition that increases studio and crit space as it goes forward. And then this is what it looks like, phase one going up, and then the addition of the wraparound glass, which is really what we're trying to do is express the studios inside. These are actually pinup walls that move around, which will show an activity within the inside going on of the building. This is the trash corral now. This is the Fab Lab yard. We're working with Lori Olin of Olin Partnership that's doing the landscape. So we're now created a stairway connection that fronts the Fine Arts building immediately across the street. And then this is a view of the app. So again, we're not rocket scientists like my friend, but what we're trying to do is really reconnect this place to its history, some of its great architecture. The building, Meyerson Hall, is not particularly good architecture, but what we're trying to do is connect it through this social space back to its history. All right, I got two more. You guys good? All right. So this is a project that we're doing in Philadelphia right now. It's a 850 bed off-campus student apartments that's allied with Penn, but also other universities. So this is the site. Amazing site. This is a great student site if you ever need if a professor needs a site to teach, because there's an elevated street here, a lower street. It's quite a mess to try to understand. But what we were trying to do with this building was really reconnect it to Penn. So this idea of it sits over top of Amtrak, the upper terrace here, really cut this thing in such a way that it opens up for entry, but also opens up the ground floor for a more porous view towards Penn and shaves the top so you get a view of the city. So this is a diagram. This is how we work in terms of different unit types, packing those together with our CAD program. and the idea of how we create different communities around these spaces here. So the skin of the building, its cuts that I mentioned a moment ago, and the idea of there being these student lounges which actually create neighborhoods in a vertical sense in this high-rise. This cut here hides a mechanical system, but it also creates a really awesome deck for a pool which looks out over the city, which is nothing like I ever had when I was in college. Here are a couple of views of that. This is the Syracuse Center. This is 30th Street Station, the old post office, and here's our building. We're actually also doing a green roof, about an acre of green roof on top of that garage, which will have various components in it that connect to it. Here you can see the different spaces of student activity, a detail of the skin, a detail of the street, a detail of the skin, and a typical plan. So it's packed. It's much like the dairy barn, packed to the gills with apartments. But what we were able to preserve in that are these student lounges which connect 2 floors via double height space. So what you get is these spaces that actually create cross connections in the building so that you can actually look down to the green roof, you can look out to the city, you start to get an interactivity amongst students of different floors. And so those things actually have a double height space, a little study lounge, some other things. Drawings for no good reason. Here's the roof deck. We just got started on this part of it. But what we're truly trying to do is animate this thing at a scale, much like the piazza that I showed earlier, at the scale of this public space, which is now elevated 75 feet above the ground. So what we're trying to do is really create a little bit of a visual on that, where the core wall, which is by nature blank, has a projection surface that will actually start to be like the Pico building, if you know Philadelphia, which is a lively part of its skyline. And then this is the roof, which is actually designed. Another trick I learned in Florence was that there's a little ha-ha in it, so you always get this reflection of the pool. My reverse doesn't work well. I think it was probably a good idea. This is a project that we worked on with Holmes King Colquist here in town. Is anybody from their firm here tonight? Me. There you go. All right, so I got to watch what I say. But Julia did not get to work on this, but this is a project, student housing, that we did, an off-campus developer, on-campus property. So some quick things about this. It's that silver thing that's like a mile long on 81. So the site is adjacent to the hill slope, which was actually all the extra soil that the university had over the past 100 years, which you can see how it all piled up here. Very complicated site with various setbacks, easements, gas lines, and very little buildable property in reality. So what we did was, in anticipation of the master plan, the new law school building going up, this idea of trying to recreate this sense of urban streets, what we try to do is anticipate this to create a space outside with very limited retail that it has. If you know, there's a Starbucks there and a C-store. But the idea of trying to knit this thing into its fabric, you can see here again how that thing works with the streetscape. And then again, how the public spaces then crack the building open to get a view of downtown from its rear terrace. So, sorry, repeat. There it is. There it is. There it is. There it is. All right, boring. And there it is. That's what it looks like now. So, last project, I promise. This is for the Southern Poverty Law Center. This was in Montgomery, Alabama. They are a firm which litigates against hate and intolerance. They started in the early 70s. So the idea that there were all these laws in the books for civil rights were not actually being enforced by the local Alabama, government and judiciary. So what they were trying to do was get redress that you couldn't get redress in the courts, but really go after these folks civilly. So, for instance, when there were all those church burnings in the Carolinas, they went and they sued the Klan that was burning them, got a $32 million judgment against the Klan that went to this 80-year-old black woman that owned the church. Basically wiped the Klan out in perpetuity. So these guys are not extremely well liked among some of the population down here. But to give you a sense of the site, this is Dexter Avenue. Rosa Parks started the bus boycott just off the screen. This is the Alabama Capitol. This is the state Supreme Court. This is the National Civil Rights Memorial that Maya Lin designed. And this is the church where Dr. Martin Luther King first started preaching in public. So it's a highly charged site, and this is the building in its complete form. What we were trying to do was really create precinct for that memorial, the names of the lives of the people that died in this process of trying to gain civil rights. So we pushed the building back, created a very solid wall here, which had all the support spaces to it, open office space here, and all glass looking to the north. So what we tried to do was create this very austere facade, except for these lounges, which were the places where the group came together to talk about their mission. If you live, no matter where you live, when you look out your window, that view becomes normal to you, and you forget about it sometimes because you see it over and over again. So what we wanted to do was, instead of staring at this thing all day long, we wanted them to come together and then see it. Because what happens is, from those meeting spaces, you look down and see the memorial, and it's the most heavily visited attraction in all of Alabama, if you can believe that. So what it does is try to reconnect them with their past. So basically, these names that people have died in the civil rights movement are now tied the way we raise the building up. That's the church where Dr. King started his preaching. So there's this connection between the beginning and the end of the civil rights memorial that we were trying to manifest. Not to mention, this thing is like embassy level security. So this is a ram barrier, 20-ton truck, 20 miles an hour. This is a garage underneath there. You can't get there except through a very onerous process where you can be seen. So what we did was, again, packed all the support or the servant functions on that side, except for the conferencing spaces. And then on the other side, did a large glass wall, which is a naturally daylit office space. There's the church where Dr. King started preaching. And then this is the north facade, which again, in the layering of the glass, it's like, in some ways, a decorative thing. But what it actually does is it masks the movement of these folks in an open office condition. So it's much more difficult to track someone with a gun sight. I shouldn't do that with the laser pointer. But to track someone with a gun sight from a tower that's adjacent to this. So the idea of that glass is actually a camouflage to try to break up that sort of entire glass pane. And then this is the final version of the project, which creates a precinct for the memorial and tries to be a calm, adjacent neighbor to that memorial. So a lot of the things that we try to do in our work, and we're still on a trajectory of learning, much like you are. One of the better professors I had talked about it's not important what you learn in school, but that you learn how to learn in school. And what we found at our firm is we're very much focused on trying new things, trying new program types, and actually trying to better our position in how we work as designers. So thank you.
Take some questions.
Sure.
Scott will take a few questions before we adjourn to go to the gallery downstairs. So, are there any questions out there? We do have a microphone here that will help amplify your question.
Excellent.
Scott, can you hear me? Somebody can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, just out of curiosity, can you talk about your firm a little bit? How big, what you do, how you're structured? How'd you get started?
Yeah, we got started when David McHenry and I realized that the place we were working, this was not an important project to them. It was a small project. So this call first came in for this building to Hillier's Princeton office. We were both at the Hillier Group, a large firm. Everyone was too busy in the Princeton office, so they asked every studio there, and then finally they called the Philadelphia office, and they said, look, we got this call from these people. They want an office building, Southern something or other. Will you talk to them? If you guys don't want to do it, just be nice and tell them no. So we started looking at their materials, and David and I were having lunch, and we realized that we were definitely in the wrong place. Because this small project is enormous in terms of its cultural mission. So that led to a long story of leaving the firm and a lot of good things. Bob Hillier was very gracious and helpful to us. But we started a project where we could actually be more in touch with the work. So we are, David or I or both are involved in every project in every phase, so we're at every meeting. We're approximately 17 people right now. We do a varied scale of work. We work very well, we're like a sports team. Everybody knows how everybody else works. So we're able to do the largest projects in Philadelphia with, a third the staff. We have a person take a project from beginning to end, working with me or David, and then they go through CA. Thanks. Oh, this is good. Well, I think that the drinks are calling, and so if anybody wants to ask a question once they have a drink, I'll be downstairs as well. So thank you.